She grew up an orphan, no mother, no father, and learned early how to survive alone in a cruel world. She had nothing left to call her own, only the ranch in the eastern hills that smelled so much of her beloved father that she locked the door from the outside and told herself she would return someday. Someday, when it hurt less. It never hurt less. She just got better at not looking in that direction. She grew up in borrowed spaces, the specific kind of independence that isn't exactly chosen, but left behind when everything else is taken away. She worked hard. She told the truth when it was inconvenient. She fought for things that deserved to be fought for, and the world punished her for it, consistently, every single time. Then came the day her pack put it all in writing. Wren Maddox was expelled from the place she had learned to call home. She would not cry about it. She had made that promise to herself years ago. She would not spend her tears on people who had not earned them. So she walked east, toward the one place she had spent 8 years avoiding, toward the crooked gate and the 40 silent acres and the particular necessary pain of returning somewhere that still remembers you. She did not expect the light in the window. She did not expect the door to open onto 2 silver-haired strangers, a man and a woman, aged and watchful, observing her with the careful stillness of people who had learned, at great cost, not to trust unexpected arrivals. She did not expect to recognize their faces. But she did, and when whatever showed in her expression made clear that she knew them, that somewhere in the distant corners of her memory, those faces had a name. The old woman slowly reached for the old man's hand. The old man closed his eyes. They held each other in that doorway as if something enormous had just shifted, as if the ground beneath them had moved. She had no idea why, but she was about to find out. If you love intense wolf stories with destiny and twists, go ahead and subscribe to the channel right now. So subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any chapters. And how about we get to know each other better? I'm Maggie Reed, the author of these stories. And you? Drop a comment below with your name and what city you're watching from. The thing about being formally expelled from your pack, Wren Maddox had decided somewhere around the 3rd reading of her offenses, was that it took considerably longer than the word expelled suggested. She had imagined, on the rare occasions she'd allowed herself to imagine it, because she was not a pessimist by nature, merely a realist with excellent observational skills, that it would be quick. A door closing, a line crossed, the sharp, clean finality of a thing ending. What she had not imagined was Elder Doyle reading from a scroll, a very long scroll, with footnotes. She stood in the center of the great hall of Redmoor Pack, the same hall where she had attended her first solstice ceremony as a pup, where she had sat on her father's shoulders to see over the crowd, where she had once, aged 9, gotten her shoe permanently stuck in the ceremonial floor grate and spent the better part of an hour explaining herself to 3 different adults. And she listened to Elder Doyle enumerate her failings with the unhurried thoroughness of a man who had been waiting years for this particular moment and intended to enjoy every syllable of it. Willful disregard for pack hierarchy on at least 4 confirmed occasions. 4. Wren had personally counted 6, but apparently 2 of them hadn't made the official record. She supposed she should take that as a victory of sorts. Public disagreement with Beta Harlan Finch during the autumn gathering, specifically the use of the phrase, "With respect, that is the single most wrong thing I have ever heard said out loud." A murmur moved through the assembled pack. Wren recognized the murmur. It was the kind that meant people were trying to decide whether to be offended or quietly amused, and hadn't yet committed to either. And finally, the incident at the harvest ceremony, in which the Omega Wren Maddox. She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. The harvest ceremony incident had involved a loose flagstone, a decorative torch bracket she had not seen, and a cascade of events so precisely timed that she had described them afterward to her only friend Bess as cosmically orchestrated, because no amount of ordinary bad luck could have arranged them so efficiently without some form of divine assistance. Knocked over the processional table, extinguishing the ceremonial flame, causing the Alpha banner to land in the soup, and then addressed Beta Harlan Finch in front of the entirety of Redmore Pack as... Elder Doyle paused here, as though the words required a moment of respectful distance before being spoken aloud. A self-important turnip in boots. The hall went absolutely silent. Then, from somewhere near the back, someone laughed. It was short and quickly suppressed, but it had been real, and it had come from at least 3 people simultaneously, and Wren tucked it away in the part of herself that was still paying attention to things worth keeping. Beta Harlan Finch, standing to Elder Doyle's left with his arms crossed and his expression arranged into the particular shape of a man who considers dignity a personal possession he has just been robbed of, did not find it amusing. The decision of this council, Elder Doyle continued, rolling the scroll back up with the finality of a thing concluded, is that the Omega Wren Maddox is hereby expelled from Redmore Pack, effective immediately. Her Omega status within this territory is revoked. She has until sundown to remove herself from Packlands. Sundown. It was noon. Wren took a slow breath. She looked out at the assembled pack. All the familiar faces, all the people she had grown up alongside, most of whom were looking at their boots or the walls or anywhere that was not directly at her, because it was easier to watch someone disappear if you didn't have to watch them look back at you. She smoothed the front of her coat. She stood a little straighter. She prepared to make, if not a perfectly dignified exit, at least an exit that would give them something to feel bad about later. "Thank you for your thorough documentation," she said to Elder Doyle, who blinked as though he had not expected to be thanked. "I'd like my copy of the scroll for my records, please." Another murmur. Slightly different flavor this time. She turned and walked, very deliberately, very steadily, toward the great hall's main doors. She made it 6 full steps before the heel of her boot caught in the same floor grate that had claimed her shoe at age 9. Time, in the way it sometimes did during the worst moments of her life, slowed considerably. She had a complete and detailed view of the next half-second. The grate, her heel, the angle of descent she was about to take. She grabbed the nearest solid thing, which turned out to be the edge of the hanging tapestry depicting Redmore Pack's founding, and it held for exactly long enough to give her hope before the rod at the top gave way with a sound like a very small thunderclap, and the entire tapestry came down over her shoulders like a particularly assertive blanket. The hall was, again, completely silent. From underneath the tapestry, Wren took a breath. "I'm fine," she said, to the fabric and whoever was listening. She disentangled herself with whatever efficiency the situation allowed, folded the tapestry as best a tapestry can be folded under those circumstances, set it on the nearest bench, and walked out of the great hall of Redmore Pack for the last time. Behind her, she heard Beta Harlan begin to say something. She did not hear what it was. The door closed. The afternoon air hit her face, cold and sharp and entirely indifferent to what had just happened inside. And Wren stood on the stone steps and breathed it in, and made herself a promise she intended to keep. She would not cry until she was somewhere no one from Redmore Pack would see her do it. The ranch came to her before anything else did. Her father's land. 3 hours east, up into the foothills, abandoned for 7 years. She hadn't gone back since she was 15. Since the summer the world had shrunk to the size of a loss she didn't know how to carry. And she had run from everything that reminded her of it, including 40 acres, a sagging fence, and a barn that smelled of cedar and her father's coat. She'd had nowhere else to go then. She had nowhere else to go now. She walked east. By the time the foothills rose properly around her and the old track narrowed between the pines, the sky had gone the deep, bruised purple of an evening that meant business. And then she saw it, and stopped. Light, warm and orange and entirely real, pressing through the gap in the old wooden shutters of the main house window, glowing against the dark like something deliberate, like something lived in. There should not have been any light. The ranch had been empty for 7 years. Someone was in her house. Wren stood at the gate her father had built, the one that still leaned slightly to the left because it always had, because he had meant to fix it, and then one spring arrived, and then another. And she weighed her options. Her options were knock or sleep in the foothills in a coat with opinions. She walked up the path and knocked. For a moment, nothing. Then, movement inside, unhurried, the sound of someone who had not been expecting company, but was not particularly alarmed about it either. A latch, the slow, familiar complaint of old hinges. The door opened. The woman in the doorway was small and silver-haired, and wrapped in what appeared to be 3 separate knitted shawls, layered with their own personal logic. And she was holding a cast-iron skillet raised to approximately ear height, with the calm, practiced readiness of someone who had done this before and would do it again without hesitation. They looked at each other. "You're not a raccoon," the old woman said, with the tone of someone updating a working theory. "No," Wren agreed. "I'm the owner of this property." A pause. The skillet did not lower. "Well," the old woman said, studying her with eyes that were dark and sharp and considerably more alert than the hour suggested they needed to be. "That does complicate things." "Opal?" A second voice came from somewhere past the glow of the old hearth, unhurried and warm, carrying the particular steadiness of a man who had long since stopped being surprised by anything the world put in his path. "Who's at the door?" A moment later he appeared. He was tall, still tall, even now, with age settled across his shoulders like a coat worn soft from long use. Silver-haired, broad across the chest, with large and careful hands wrapped around a chipped clay mug and kind eyes that found Wren immediately and regarded her with nothing more threatening than gentle, genuine curiosity. The worn lines of his face told a story she couldn't quite read yet, the kind of face that had once held something heavier than what it carried now and had learned, slowly, to put it down. He looked at Wren. Wren looked at him. And then something nagged at her, something she couldn't place for a moment, the way a word hovers just outside of memory. She'd seen that face before. Not in person. In the old illustrated histories her father had kept on the shelf above the fireplace, the ones with the dark leather spines and the gold-stamped titles she'd spent half her childhood reading by firelight, the face of a king who was supposed to be dead. "You're—" she started. Opal lowered the skillet, finally, and with the air of someone making a considered decision. "We should sit down," she said. The kitchen table had a scorch mark the shape of a small, misguided continent, and Wren was staring at it, because it was easier than staring at the 2 people sitting across from her. Opal had made tea. She had done this with the focused efficiency of a woman who understood that hot beverages bought time and gave hands something to do. And she had set a mug in front of Wren without asking what she took in it, which turned out to be exactly right. The skillet was back on its hook. The fire in the hearth had settled into a steady, civilized burn. Everything in the kitchen had the particular quality of a space that had been lived in carefully. Not richly, not sparely, but with the quiet intention of people who had learned to find dignity in small things. The man whose face she had seen in history books, sat with both hands wrapped around his mug and waited with the patience of someone for whom waiting had become a long practice rather than a skill. Wren cleared her throat. "So," she said, "you're either the former Alpha King of Ironvale, or you look exactly like him, which I suppose is its own kind of problem." The old man looked at his wife. His wife looked at him. "She's quick," Opal said, with the tone of someone filing a favorable report. "She is," he agreed. He set down his mug and extended one large, weathered hand across the table. "Gareth Ashbourne, and yes, formerly, Opal Ashbourne, my Luna." He said that last word the way people say things that still carry weight after years of being said, like a truth that doesn't need defending. Wren shook his hand. It was, she thought, a very steady hand for a man who was supposed to have died in a riding accident 4 years ago. "I read the obituary," she said. "There was a state ceremony. The pack territories had 3 days of mourning. "We know," Opal said, wrapping both hands around her mug. "We attended, in a manner of speaking, from a very safe distance." She paused. "It was a lovely ceremony. Very thorough flowers." Wren stared at her. "You attended your own memorial service." "We stood in the tree line," Gareth clarified, in the tone of a man drawing an important distinction. "We didn't attend so much as observe. From the tree line." "The hydrangeas were genuinely impressive," Opal said. "White and gold, Rowan's favorites." Something moved briefly across her face at the name, a shadow there and gone, like a cloud crossing a winter sun. Though he doesn't remember that now. And there it was. The name Wren had been waiting for, arriving in the quiet of the kitchen like a stone dropped into still water. Rowan. She had read that name too, the new Alpha King of Ironvale, crowned in the same season as his parents' supposed deaths. Young. Reported to be strong. Reported to be fair, though the reports had grown quieter in recent years, the kind of quiet that falls over a kingdom the way fog falls over a valley, gradually and without announcement, until one morning you look up and can't see the hills anymore. "Tell me," Wren said. "All of it," Gareth told her. He told it the way people tell stories they have told themselves 100 times in private. Not quickly, but without hesitation, each piece placed with care. Rowan had been 26 when it happened. A good rider, a careful one. The horse had spooked at something on the eastern trail, and Rowan had gone down hard on a stone outcropping. And by the time the stable hands reached him, he was breathing but not conscious, and the healer's report had used words like significant and time and uncertain in ways that meant something worse than any of those words individually. The first person to reach the castle with the news, before the stable hands had even returned, was Celeste Vane. Rowan's betrothed. The woman who had been standing at his side for 3 years, learning the court, learning the protocols, learning, and this, Gareth said, was the part he had not understood until it was too late. Learning exactly where every door opened and every lever moved. "She came to us that night," Opal said, taking up the thread with the steadiness of someone who has made peace with a wound, even if the peace is hard won. "Very composed, very kind, or what looked like kindness. She told us Rowan's condition was grave, that the castle was frightened, that what the people needed was stability." Her fingers tightened slightly around the mug. "She suggested, very gently, that we consider stepping back from our public duties temporarily. Just until Rowan recovered, just to keep the peace." "And within 3 days," Gareth continued, his voice even, "she had moved us from the east wing to the guest quarters. Within a week, the guest quarters to the groundskeeper's cottage. And one morning we woke to find the cottage locked from the outside, our belongings packed, and 2 of her personal guards waiting to escort us to the eastern gate." He looked at his hands. She had told the entire kingdom we had died in the accident alongside our son, that the grief-stricken Rowan, recovering from his injuries and his loss, had chosen to honor his commitment and take the throne with his faithful betrothed at his side. A pause. She had 3 weeks' worth of documentation ready. She had thought of everything. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind moved through the pine trees with a sound like low breathing. Wren sat with it for a moment. The weight of it. 4 years. 2 people, quietly alive in a house that didn't belong to them, on land that had belonged to a dead girl's dead father, waiting for the right moment in a situation designed to ensure the right moment never came. "Why haven't you gone back?" she asked. Not accusingly, she genuinely wanted to understand. "Because the first time we tried," Opal said simply, "Celeste sent word to every pack healer in the territory that anyone providing aid to 2 elderly wolves matching our description would be considered enemies of Iron Vale. She did not threaten us directly." A small, dry curve of the lip. "She is very careful about directness. But the message was plain enough. If we pushed, if we made noise, if we showed ourselves, it wouldn't be us who paid the price." Rowan, Wren said. Rowan, Gareth confirmed. He doesn't know us. He doesn't remember us. As far as he knows, we are the parents he mourned and buried, and a man who doesn't know he's in danger can't protect himself from it. He looked at Wren steadily. So we have been careful. We have been patient. And we have been waiting for something to change. He did not say, and then you knocked on our door. He didn't need to. Wren looked down at the scorch mark on the table. She thought about her father's hands building this table. She thought about the history books on his shelf, the one with the gold-stamped spine, the one she had read so many times the cover had gone soft. She thought about the expulsion ceremony that morning, the scroll, the grate, the tapestry, and the particular way the universe sometimes arranged things that looked like disasters and turned out to be something else entirely. I need a job, she said. Gareth blinked. Opal tilted her head. I've just been expelled from my pack, Wren continued, with the brisk practicality of someone converting a catastrophe into a logistics problem, which means I have no territory, no income, and as of approximately 6 hours ago, no particular future to speak of. I also have no criminal record, no connection to Iron Vale, and, crucially, no face that anyone in that castle has ever seen. She looked at them both. Celeste Vane is looking for enemies. She's not looking for a nobody Omega from Redmoor who needs work, a servant, a kitchen hand, someone who mops floors and empties ash buckets and is absolutely invisible to anyone who matters. The kitchen was very quiet. You're suggesting, Gareth said slowly, that you walk into the castle as hired help. I'm suggesting I walk into the castle as hired help and find out what you need to know to get your son back. Opal set down her mug. She looked at Wren for a long moment with those dark, sharp eyes that had been reading people, Wren suspected, for considerably longer than Wren had been alive. You have been expelled from your pack, she said. Humiliated in front of your entire community, walked 4 hours in the cold, discovered strangers living in your dead father's house, and in the space of 1 cup of tea have decided to infiltrate a royal castle on behalf of 2 elderly people you met 40 minutes ago. She paused. Why? It was a fair question. Wren had expected skepticism, or gratitude, or negotiation. Not that question, asked in that tone. The tone of someone who genuinely wanted to know. She looked at the hearth, at the careful arrangement of the room, at Opal's 3-layered shawls and Gareth's chipped mug and the crooked shelf above the fireplace where someone had put a row of small stones, river smooth, the kind of thing people collect without meaning to. The kind of thing that says we made a life here even when the life wasn't the one they were supposed to have. Because, Wren said, your son is living inside a lie he doesn't know is a lie. Because the kingdom my father used to tell me about, the one in those books, the one with the king who built the free healers' houses, and the Luna who rode out herself to the drought villages. That kingdom is sitting under someone else's thumb and shrinking. She met Opal's eyes. And because I have nowhere else to be, and it turns out I have strong feelings about injustice. I always have. It's gotten me into trouble my whole life. A beat. Ask Elder Doyle. He has it documented. Opal looked at Gareth. Something passed between them. Wordless, swift, the specific communication of 2 people who have lived long enough together that entire conversations happen in a glance. Gareth reached across the table and placed 1 large hand briefly over Wren's, just for a moment, steady and warm and saying something that neither of them was ready to name yet. There is one more thing you should know, he said, before you decide. He turned his wrist over on the table. There, just below the inside of his wrist, was a mark. Faint as an old scar, shaped like a curved flame. The Ember Mark. Every true Alpha King of Iron Vale carries it, and so does his true mate. He glanced at Opal, who turned her own wrist up to show its match. When the bond is genuine, the mark burns warm and amber. When it is not... He paused. Rowan's mark has been ash-gray since the day Celeste put that crown on his head. Our people see it but do not speak of it. They have been told it is grief, the mark of a king in mourning. His jaw tightened just slightly. It is not grief. It is a false bond, and the land knows it. Wren looked at the two matching marks, one on each wrist, warm even now, amber as firelight. She thought about the dry harvest she'd heard about at the edges of the territory, the healers closing their doors, the slow gray quiet of a kingdom losing something it couldn't name. "All right," she said. She wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at them both. This silver-haired king in a borrowed house and his Luna with her cast-iron skillet and her 3 shawls and her eyes that missed nothing. "Tell me everything about that castle. Every entrance, every shift change, every person Celeste trusts and everyone she doesn't." She lifted her chin. "I start tomorrow." Opal smiled then. It was not a small smile. It was the kind that had been waiting patiently for the right moment and had just decided this was it. "I'll make more tea," she said. They talked until the fire burned low and the night outside the windows went from dark to the particular deep dark that means it is very late and the world has gone quiet. Gareth drew a map of the castle from memory on the back of an old seed catalog, floor by floor, entrance by entrance, the servants' corridors and the kitchen rotations and the laundry courtyard where staff were taken on without much inspection, because the work was hard and the turnover was high. Opal added corrections in the margins with a stub of charcoal pencil, and occasionally said things like, "That hallway is narrower than you remember, Gareth," and "The east kitchen has 2 doors now. They added one after the pipe incident," in ways that suggested she had been paying very close attention to Ironvale's architecture even from a distance. By the time Wren rolled the map and tucked it inside her coat, she knew the castle better than most people who lived in it. Gareth walked her to the door in the morning gray, when the foothills were just beginning to catch the first pale edge of dawn. He said nothing for a moment, and she said nothing either, both of them looking out at the track that led down toward the valley road and the 2 days' walk to Ironvale's outer gate. "You remind me of someone," he said finally, quiet enough that it was almost just for himself. "Who?" He smiled. It was a small, tired, genuine smile, the kind that lives in the corners of the mouth rather than the full width of it. "The young woman who used to argue with my council every time they tried to raise the toll roads," he said. "She was an Omega from the border settlements. Nobody important, according to anyone who had an opinion about such things." He looked at Wren sidelong. She was right about the toll roads, as it turned out. Wren picked up her bag. "What happened to her?" "She married a stubborn alpha who didn't deserve her," he said, "and spent 30 years making him better." Behind them, inside the house, came the precise sound of Opal doing something efficiently in the kitchen, not listening at all. "Safe travels, Wren Maddox." She walked down the track as the sun came up over the foothills, and the pines caught the light and turned gold, and the cold air tasted of pine resin and wood smoke, and the specific clean sharpness of a morning that doesn't know yet what it's going to become. Behind her, the ranch sat quiet in the new light, crooked gate and all. She did not look back, but she made a note, somewhere in the part of herself she kept for things that mattered, that there were 2 people in that house she intended to come back to. Ahead of her, 2 days' walk away, the towers of Ironvale Castle were just beginning to catch the morning. And somewhere inside those walls, a king with ash-gray marks on his wrists was waking up to a life that wasn't his, and had no idea that the thing that might change it all was walking toward his gate, carrying a rolled-up seed catalog and a very strong cup of tea's worth of determination. The woman who hired Wren asked her 3 questions. The first was whether she could carry 2 full water buckets from the lower well to the 3rd floor without spilling. The second was whether she had any objection to the early morning shift, which started before dawn and was referred to by the rest of the staff, she would later learn, as the gray hours, a name that, judging by the way people said it, was not a poetic choice. The third was whether she had any enemies within the castle walls. "No," Wren said. which was true at the time, and had a fairly short expiration date. The head housekeeper, a tall, angular woman named Mrs. Edna Foss, who had the posture of a woman who had personally corrected the posture of a great many other people and considered the work ongoing, looked Wren over for exactly 4 seconds. Then she handed her a gray uniform 2 sizes too large in the shoulders and 1 size too short in the leg, a list of rooms to clean by midday, and a mop. "Don't speak to the king unless he speaks to you," Mrs. Foss said. "Don't enter the north wing without permission. Don't let the south kitchen cat into the dairy larder again. And don't," she added, in a tone that placed this firmly above everything else on the list, "touch the candelabras in the great hall. They are older than this kingdom. They are my responsibility, and I have strong feelings about the matter." "Understood," Wren said. She understood approximately 70% of the castle. That was the other thing about Gareth's map. It was detailed, accurate, and 4 years out of date, which in castle terms meant that what he remembered as the East Servants' Corridor was now a wall. What he remembered as a wall was now the East Servants' Corridor, and the small room he had helpfully labeled Useful Shortcut had been converted into storage for approximately 800 candles and a confusing number of decorative antlers. She discovered this on the first morning. She also discovered that the 3rd step on the back staircase made a sound like a man clearing his throat. That the South Kitchen cat, Gareth had not mentioned the South Kitchen cat, had opinions about new arrivals, and was not shy about expressing them, and that Mrs. Foss appeared at the end of every hallway at the exact moment Wren was consulting the map, which suggested either supernatural spatial awareness or a deeply inconvenient coincidence that happened every single time. The kitchen boy told her the cat's name was Lord Barnaby. Lord Barnaby had hissed at Wren 4 times on the first day. "Does he do that to everyone?" Wren asked. "Yes," said the kitchen boy, "but it means he likes you if he only hisses once." Wren decided not to think about what 4 hisses meant. She met the king on the 3rd day. This was not the plan. The plan was to be invisible for at least 2 weeks before anyone of consequence noticed her. A plan that the universe considered reasonable in spirit and immediately began undermining in practice. She was carrying a tall stack of folded linens from the upper laundry to the east corridor, the kind of stack that requires balancing and optimism in equal measure, when she turned a corner on the 2nd floor and stopped because someone was already there, and that someone's hand was now steadying the top of the pile before it went sideways entirely. "Oh," said Wren from behind the linens. "Careful," said the person holding the stack. She lowered the pile enough to see him. Rowan Ashbourne was not in his formal coat. He had come from the stables by the look of it. There was a trace of cold air and horse and morning about him, and his dark hair was slightly wind-disordered, and he was looking at her with the focused attention of someone determining whether to be concerned or amused. He settled on something in between. "I've got them," Wren said. "I can see that." He didn't let go of the top of the stack until she had it fully balanced. "You're new." 3 days. "The corner," he said, with the mild candor of someone admitting to a long-neglected personal failure, "is sharper than it looks. I've been meaning to have it seen to for 2 years. "It's fine," Wren said. "I've met sharper corners." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite amusement, but the place where amusement lives when it's decided to be polite about it. "What's your name?" "Wren Maddox." She said it before she had time to reconsider, which was a recurring theme in her life. He repeated it quietly, the way people repeat words that sound like something else they've been trying to remember. Then he glanced down at his right wrist. She had been briefed on the ember mark. She knew what dormant looked like. Ash gray, flat, the color of a fire that had been out long enough that the warmth was only a memory. She knew what it was supposed to look like when alive. She was not entirely prepared for watching it shift, just fractionally, from ash to something almost warm. He stared at it. A muscle moved in his jaw. "Rowan." Celeste's voice came from the far end of the corridor, unhurried, precisely modulated, each word placed where it needed to be. She moved toward them with the smooth inevitability of a tide coming in, and her eyes moved first to Ren, then briefly to Rowan's wrist, then back to Ren's face. Her expression did not change. That, Ren would think later, was the most frightening thing about her, not her sharpness, not her stillness. The fact that whatever she registered privately, somewhere no one was invited to see. "There's a council matter this afternoon," she said to Rowan. Her hand rested lightly on his arm. "You should eat first." "In a moment," he said. "Of course." She glanced at Ren. "Thank you for the linens." Perfectly pleasant. A locked door in a pleasant voice. Ren gathered her stack and walked. That evening, she found a folded note slipped under the dormitory door. No signature, no seal, the handwriting careful and completely unidentifiable. "I know who sent you. Leave by morning, or stay and find out what this castle does with problems it can't afford." Ren read it twice, folded it, tucked it beside Gareth's map. She stayed. 2 weeks. She had been at the castle for 2 weeks, and several things had become clear. The first was that Lord Barnaby had revised his assessment of her from 4 hisses to 1, which the kitchen boy confirmed was essentially a declaration of friendship. The second was that Ren had gotten better at consulting Gareth's map without looking like she was consulting a map. Or, alternatively, Mrs. Foss had not gotten any worse at appearing at the end of hallways, and Ren had simply made peace with it. The third, and most significant, was that the Alpha King of Ironvale had found reasons to be in the Eastern Kitchen, the back library corridor, the herb garden courtyard, and the South Laundry anteroom on 9 separate occasions, none of which had anything whatsoever to do with kitchens, libraries, herb gardens, or laundry. Ren had counted. She wasn't sure what Rowan told himself these visits were about. She suspected he wasn't entirely sure either. He always arrived with a plausible purpose, and always stayed slightly longer than the purpose required, and always left with the expression of a man who went looking for something he couldn't name and suspects it was closer than he found it. The ember mark on his wrist had been warming by increments. He didn't mention it. She didn't mention it. It was the loudest thing in every room they shared. "You should be more careful," he said one morning in the herb garden, when she had cut her thumb on the shears in a way that was entirely avoidable. "I'm always careful," Ren said. "You're bleeding." "I'm carefully bleeding. Very controlled situation." He handed her a cloth from his pocket without comment. She took it without comment. Their hands didn't touch. The mark on his wrist was the color of warm coals. He looked at it again after she walked away. She knew, because she had developed the precise skill of knowing when Rowan was looking at his wrist without looking at him. It was a skill she wished she didn't need and used constantly. The market came on the 1st of the month, as Gareth had described. Vendors along the outer castle road from dawn to midday, the ordinary, necessary commerce of a territory that still, despite everything, needed to feed itself. Ren had sent word through a traveling grain merchant 2 weeks prior. The message had been 4 words, 1st of the month, sage. She had been 90% certain they would come. The remaining 10% had spent 2 weeks sitting quietly in the back of her chest, not making noise but definitely present. She brought Rowan to the market through a sequence of events arranged to look entirely accidental. A comment to the head cook about a rare variety of lowland sage, excellent for preservation brine, very difficult to source. She thought she'd spotted some at the road market. The head cook mentioned it to the kitchen steward. The kitchen steward mentioned it to Rowan, who happened to be in the kitchen again for no particular reason, and who said, in the casual tone of a man making a spontaneous decision, that he would go himself. Ren walked 2 steps behind him with a market basket, being invisible at roughly 40% efficiency. She spotted Gareth before Rowan did. He was exactly where she had asked, east side of the road, behind a trestle table with bundles of sage, rosemary, and thyme, arranged with the careful, quiet dignity of a man who had once organized the architecture of an entire kingdom and now organized what he could. Opal stood 3 feet to his left, engaged in what appeared to be a robust disagreement with the smoked fish vendor beside her about the correct method for curing. The smoked fish vendor was losing. He did not know it yet. Rowan slowed before he reached the table. Just slightly. The way a person slows when something registers below the level of language, not a thought, not a memory, just a pull. A warmth in the direction of something familiar. Gareth looked up. Wren held her breath. Gareth looked at his son's face, 4 years older, harder at the jaw, with lines at the corners of his eyes that hadn't been there before, and did the most difficult thing he had done in a long life full of difficult things. He smiled at him like a stranger. "Morning," Gareth said. "Sage? Just dried last month. Lowland variety, the good kind." "Yes," Rowan said. His voice had gone quieter than usual, the way a room goes quiet before you realize you've been holding your breath. "How much?" They negotiated. Wren watched Rowan reach for a bundle, watched his fingers brush the worn wood of the trestle table that Gareth's hands had been resting on. And he went still, just for a moment. Not frightened still, listening still, the way you stop when you hear a sound you recognize from somewhere you can't place. Opal had drifted over, the smoked fish matter apparently resolved to her satisfaction. She looked at Rowan and offered him a piece of dried apple from a small cloth pouch the way she offered it to everyone. Naturally, warmly, with the ease of someone for whom feeding people was as reflexive as breathing. Rowan accepted it without thinking, the way you accept something from someone who feels, without explanation, like they have the right to offer it. He ate it. Then he was quiet. "Good?" Wren asked. "It tastes like something I used to know," he said. He said it softly, like something he hadn't meant to say aloud. He looked at the apple in his hand. "I can't place it." At the table, Gareth turned to rearrange his herb bundles. His back was to them. His shoulders were very straight and very still, in the way of a person holding something that needs holding. Rowan bought considerably more sage than any castle kitchen needed. He bought dried apple as well. Before they left, he asked Gareth, without quite looking at him directly, as if the question were aimed somewhere adjacent to him, whether they came to this market regularly. "First of every month," Gareth said. "Good," Rowan said. He set it to the bundle of sage. "Good." On the walk back through the castle gate, he didn't speak. Wren didn't either. The ember mark on his wrist was the warmest she had ever seen it. Not amber yet, not fully, but something more than ash. Something almost alive. She looked straight ahead and said nothing, and felt in the complicated privacy of her own chest, something that had no name yet and was going to be a problem later. Celeste was waiting for her that evening. Not the anonymous note this time. A personal summons, delivered by a castle page with the expression of a person doing their job, and hoping very hard not to be associated with whatever came next. The sitting room was beautiful in the way that some things are beautiful and cold simultaneously. Pale stone, silver fixtures, furniture chosen for impression rather than comfort. Celeste sat near the fire in deep blue and regarded Wren with the clear, settled attention of a woman who has made a decision and is now managing the details of it. "Sit down," she said. "Please." There it was, the please that was something else entirely. Wren sat. Celeste looked at her for a long moment, unhurried, the way she did everything. Then, "I'm going to make you an offer. A genuine one, in good faith, and you would be wise to take it." She reached to the small table beside her and set a leather pouch on the armrest between them, heavy, the specific sound of a great deal of coin. "Leave Ironvale tonight, or tomorrow morning, whenever you like. Go somewhere the territory records don't reach. Start something new. I have no interest in what happens to you once you cross the border." Wren looked at the pouch, then at Celeste. "I appreciate the offer," she said. "No." Something moved behind Celeste's eyes. Not quite anger, not quite respect. Genuinely a mixture of both. She picked the pouch back up, unhurried. "I was hoping you'd say yes," she said. "It would have been considerably more convenient for everyone." She stood. One smooth final motion. "I'll have to be less convenient then." The next morning, Mrs. Foss summoned all recently hired staff to the main hall. A man stood beside her, compact, methodical, carrying a ledger with the quiet efficiency of someone sent to find a specific thing who is confident he knows what it looks like. He was reviewing employment records, he announced, for irregularities. He was reviewing, specifically, expulsion records of recently arrived Pac Omegas. Wren stood in the back row of assembled servants. She felt with precise clarity the sensation of someone who has walked into a carefully arranged room and heard the door click shut behind them. In her coat pocket, Gareth's map pressed against her side. She breathed slowly. She thought about the note she hadn't left by. She thought about the dried apple and the man who couldn't place the taste, and the way Gareth had kept his back turned so nobody could see his face. She thought, not yet. Not today. The investigator's name was Aldrin Spoke, and he had been doing this job for 11 years, and he had the neutral, practiced efficiency of a man who had long since made peace with the fact that people were rarely glad to see him. He called 14 names before he got to hers. Wren Maddox, Redmore Pack. He looked up from the ledger. Expelled. 7 days prior to your application here. The main hall went quiet. 40-odd servants in gray uniforms found places to look that were not Wren, which was how she knew it was bad. She stood very still and kept her face arranged into something calm and thought, "This is fine. This is fine. This is... She's under my protection." The voice came from the doorway. Rowan stood at the entrance with his arms crossed and his expression set in the settled, absolute way of a person who has made a decision and is not currently interested in the procedural objections to it. He was still holding a half-open letter he had clearly been reading before something pulled him here. He looked in this moment very much like the son of the man who had once personally ridden to drought villages. Aldrin Spoke blinked. "Your Majesty, the regulations..." "I'm aware of the regulations." Rowan's voice was even. "She's under my protection. Update your records." It was not, technically, a thing. Wren knew this. From Aldrin Spoke's expression, he also knew this. But Rowan said it with the specific authority of a man who had been carrying a crown for 4 years and had learned, whatever else the time had cost him, how to make a room believe him. And after a long suspended moment, the investigator made a notation and moved on. Wren let out a breath she'd been holding for 2 days. Across the hall, Celeste stood in the doorway, watching. Her expression, as always, told nothing. But her eyes moved from Rowan to Wren and back in a way that said everything she was choosing not to say aloud. It happened that afternoon. Not because Wren planned it. Not because Rowan sought it. It happened because the universe, having apparently decided that patience was a virtue it had exercised long enough, chose the Eastern Corridor on a gray Tuesday to do what it had been building toward for 4 years. She was carrying linens. She was always carrying linens when things happened. She was developing a complicated relationship with folded cloth. He fell into step beside her the way he sometimes did now, without announcement, without a convincing reason, the way that had stopped startling her and started feeling, in a way she was not examining too closely, like something that belonged to the day's rhythm. "Thank you," she said. "This morning." It was nothing. It wasn't nothing. He was quiet. "I know." They walked. The third step on the back staircase cleared its throat. Outside, the first gray edge of evening was settling over the courtyard. "The herb sellers," Rowan said after a while. "From the market. You know them?" "Yes." "How well?" She considered several answers. "Well enough." He nodded, slow. He looked down at his wrist. The ember mark had been warm all day. Not the gradual, incremental warmth she'd been watching for weeks, but something more insistent. Something that had been blocked a long time and had finally found a way through. He stopped walking. She stopped too. The mark was burning now, not painfully, but with the urgency of something that had been waiting to be acknowledged for a very long time and had run out of patience. It was amber. Real amber, the color Gareth had described, edged in warmth that had nothing to do with the corridor's lamps. Rowan pressed his hand flat against the wall. His jaw was set, his eyes slightly unfocused, the look of a man listening to something only he could hear. Then his face changed. It was not gradual. It was the way a door opens when the lock finally turns. Sudden and total, before and after separated by a single instant. She watched it happen, the lines of careful composure breaking apart, something vast and uncontrolled moving beneath the surface. 4 years of sealed-over truth finding its level all at once. The letter fell from his hand. Neither of them looked at it. "The trail," he said. His voice was someone else's and exactly his own at the same time. "The horse spooked. There was something on the path I couldn't—" He stopped. His hand moved to his forehead. "She was at my bedside. Before I was awake enough to ask questions, she was already—" His throat worked. "They weren't in the accident. They were never in the accident." "No," Wren said. "They weren't. Celeste told me—" He looked at her, and his eyes held the specific, enormous grief of a man who has just understood the shape of 4 years and is standing in the middle of it. "She told me everything, and I believed her because I had no reason not to, and she made certain I never would." A long breath. "They're alive." "Yes." "You know where they are." "Yes." He looked at her for a moment, at her face, her steady hands, the coat that still had Gareth's map in the pocket. Something in his expression moved in a way that was not grief, and not the mark and not gratitude, but was, she thought, all 3 of those things at once finding the same place to land. "Bring them to me," he said. The last word broke, just slightly, just enough. "Please." They came that evening, Gareth first, then Opal, moving through the castle corridor with the particular composure of 2 people who have been rehearsing this moment in their minds for 4 years and have decided, firmly, not to waste it by falling apart in the hallway. Wren stayed outside the study door. She told herself it was because this was not her moment, and that was true. But the fuller truth was that she stood in the corridor and listened to the sound of the door opening, and then a silence that was not empty. The kind of silence that is completely full. The kind that exists only between people who mean everything to each other and have run out of words for it. Then Rowan's voice. Low, unguarded, stripped of the 4 years of careful steadiness she had come to know. "Mama." One word, said the way you say a word you haven't let yourself say in a very long time, in the voice of someone who didn't know until this moment exactly how much weight he'd been carrying without it. Wren pressed her back against the stone wall. She looked at the ceiling. She was absolutely not crying. She was, in fact, crying, but only the kind that doesn't count. The kind that happens to you rather than from you. The kind that you couldn't have stopped even if you'd wanted to. Opal said something through the door, low and fierce and full of 30 years of love that had not diminished by 1 degree for having been separated from its object. Gareth did not speak at all for a long time. He didn't need to. Celeste did not run. That was the thing Wren had not expected. Not the composure of the woman who sat in the pale sitting room and waited for Rowan to come to her, but the fact that she stayed at all. That she chose to be present for the accounting. When Rowan entered, she looked at him and said very simply, "You know?" "Yes." She looked at her hands. A long moment. "I'm not going to tell you I'm sorry," she said. "I think you deserve the truth more than the performance of it." Another pause. "I believed the kingdom needed something your parents weren't giving it. I watched your father reduce the pack levies and open the healers' houses and give land to the border settlements, and I believed it was making us weak. I believed I could make the decisions that needed making without flinching." The firelight moved across her face. "I was not wrong about everything, but I was wrong about this, about the cost of it." Something in her expression settled. Not softening exactly, but arriving somewhere that was more honest than anything she had shown anyone in 4 years. "About the cost to you." Rowan was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was even. "You will leave Ironvale," he said, "with enough to go somewhere and build something new. That is my offer. The only one I'll make." Celeste looked at him. Then she nodded. Once, clean. The nod of someone accepting terms they had half expected and had decided in the private court of their own conscience they had earned. She was gone by morning. The pale sitting room looked smaller without her in it. Wren walked past it the next day and did not stop, but she thought, that is a person who will spend a long time alone with the decisions she made. She thought that was, in its own way, enough. The council was the hardest part, and also, in the end, the simplest. Not because there was no resistance. There was one holdout, a senior counselor named Aldrin Spoke, who cited precedent and procedure with the focused energy of a man using paperwork to manage his feelings. But because most of the men and women around that long table, faced with the living and extremely present former Alpha King and his Luna, found their convictions about the previous arrangement adjusting with remarkable speed. Gareth let Aldrin Spoke finish. Then he said, "Aldrin, you've known me for 22 years. Sit down." Aldrin Spoke sat down. The formal restoration of the Ashbourne line took 3 days and a great deal of documentation. Gareth handled most of it with the systematic patience of a man who had been mentally preparing for 4 years and had used the time productively. Opal sat beside him and made corrections in the margins of every document, and occasionally reminded people of clauses they appeared to have forgotten, and at one point informed the head archivist that his filing system was, and she said this with the kindness of someone delivering genuinely useful information, an organizational catastrophe. The head archivist thanked her. People always thanked Opal. She had that effect. Rowan spent those 3 days relearning the shape of his own history. Not all at once, not painfully, but the way things return when you are finally allowed to look at them. Evenings with his parents. Long conversations tracing territory records from the years he'd lost. His father's hands on the same maps Wren had seen sketched on the back of a seed catalog, now back on the council table where they belonged. Some things were harder than others. He was patient with himself in a way she suspected he hadn't always been, and she did not say this aloud. But she thought it, and stored it somewhere she intended to keep. He asked her to stay on the 4th day, not formally, not with ceremony. He found her in the herb garden. She had continued working, because idle hands and Wren Maddox had never agreed on much. And he sat on the low stone bench by the rosemary and watched her work for a while without speaking. Then, "I'd like you to stay. Not as a servant." "I know what you mean," Wren said without turning around. "I want to say it clearly anyway." He was quiet for a moment, finding the words with the care of a man who has learned, at some cost, that words matter. Not because of the mark. Or not only. Because you walked into this castle for 2 people you'd known for 3 days, and you stayed when she told you to leave, and you stayed again, and... A pause. "I choose you. Consciously. Knowing what I'm asking and wanting to ask it." She turned around. He was looking at her with the same directness he'd had since the corridor on the 3rd day. No performance in it. No careful arrangement. Just entirely honest, in the slightly unsteady way that honest things sometimes are. She thought about the great hall of Redmoor Pack. the scroll with footnotes, the tapestry. The afternoon she had walked east with nothing but the memory of a crooked gate and no better option. She thought about how the worst day of her life had been, in its roundabout and unreasonable way, the beginning of this. "All right," she said, "but you have to fix the gate." He blinked. The gate. "At the ranch. My father's gate. It leans to the left." She paused. "Actually, leave the lean. Just make sure it won't fall down." "You want me to fix the gate but preserve the lean?" "Yes." He looked at her for a moment. "That is a very specific set of requirements. I have very specific feelings about that gate." He smiled. The full one. The real one. The one she had been watching come easier since the study door and the word mama and 3 days of his parents back where they belonged. Wide and genuine and slightly unsteady in the best possible way. "I'll leave the lean," he said. The free healers' houses reopened within the month. The market road grew louder. More vendors, more voices, more of the ordinary glad noise of a place that has remembered it is allowed to want things again. The border settlement levies were reduced. The drought year grain reserves, which Celeste had quietly redirected, were restored to the pack territories that had been going without. Small things. The kind that add up into the texture of a kingdom that is breathing again. Gareth went back to the council chambers with the air of a man returning to a chair he had left temporarily, and found, with mild satisfaction, still warm. Opal reorganized the east wing, which took 4 days, 2 rearranged tapestries, a new window seat, and a productive disagreement with the castle steward about the herb shelf, and then declared the matter settled, because she had decided it was settled, and Opal's decisions had a way of becoming facts. Lord Barnaby relocated to the ranch at the end of the 2nd month. He made this decision unilaterally, as he made all decisions, and communicated it by walking through the front door one morning and sitting in the kitchen window with the proprietary satisfaction of a cat who has correctly identified the better arrangement. He hissed at Rowan twice on the first visit. "2 hisses," said the kitchen boy, who had, somehow, also migrated to the ranch, on a logic that nobody questioned. "Means he likes you." Rowan looked at Lord Barnaby. Lord Barnaby looked at Rowan with the amber eyes of a cat who had made a decision and was not reconsidering it. "Reassuring," Rowan said. The ember ceremony was simple. Just the 4 of them, on the ranch, on a clear evening when the new moon left the sky wide open and full of stars, and the air tasted of pine, and the specific cold cleanness of a night that asks nothing of you. Gareth spoke the old words, the recognition, the confirmation, the declaration that what the mark had already said was now said in the language of the living. His voice was steady. Opal held Wren's hands from the beginning of it to the end, and did not let go, and that, more than the words, more than the mark, more than anything else, was what made Wren's eyes fill and overflow in a way she made no effort to prevent. Rowan's mark was amber all the way through. Hers matched it, the same fire, the same source, the same warmth that had been building from the first morning in the corridor and had been, all along, trying to tell her something she had been too busy surviving to hear clearly. Gareth fixed the gate the following Saturday. Rowan helped. Wren sat on the porch and watched, and Gareth told Rowan at intervals that he was doing it correctly, then slightly wrong, then correctly again, in the manner of a man who had strong opinions about gate repair, and was glad to have somewhere useful to put them. Rowan listened to all of it with the patient focus of a man who has a great deal of lost time to make up and intends to spend it well. The gate still leaned. Just slightly. Just the right amount. It was exactly right. Epilogue. The kitchen table at Maddox Ranch still had the scorch mark the shape of a small misguided continent, and 4 people had stopped noticing it entirely, which was the best thing that can happen to a scar. Opal had made soup. She had made it with the focused authority of a woman who had never once needed a recipe, and it was perfect. And the only person who might have suggested otherwise was Lord Barnaby, who had his own opinions about fish broth and expressed them through the medium of pointed staring from the kitchen window. No one acted on his feedback. He was accustomed to this. Gareth was in the middle of explaining to Rowan, in the specific, enthusiastic detail of a man who had been storing up fatherly opinions for 4 years and was making productive use of the backlog. Exactly why the Eastern drainage proposal needed revision before it went to the full council. Rowan was listening with the patient, genuine attention of a son who has learned, at considerable personal cost, to value the particular gift of having someone tell him plainly when something needs revision. Wren was eating her soup and not pretending she wasn't listening to every word. On the shelf above the fireplace, between a row of river-smooth stones and a bundle of dried sage that Gareth had brought from last month's market, sat the old history book, leather-spined, gold-stamped, worn soft from long use, the one her father had read to her. The pages with the illustrated faces that she had studied so many times she had known them before she ever met the people behind them. She had told them that one evening. Gareth had gone quiet and looked at the table. Opal had reached across and squeezed her hand and not let go for a while, in the way she had. Rowan had looked at her with the expression she had learned to read by now. The one that said he understood something about her that went past the words, that she was safe to have been shaped by everything that had shaped her, that none of it was too much. Across the table, he looked up now and found her watching, the way he always did. He did not look away, the way he never did. He smiled, the full one, the real one, and then went straight back to arguing with his father about drainage infrastructure, because some things are romantic and some things are practical, and the best lives tend to have generous amounts of both. The ember mark on Wren's wrist was warm. It was always warm now. She had stopped noticing that too, in the best possible way. The way you stop noticing the weight of something you carry when it becomes, simply, yours. Outside the window, the gate leaned its familiar lean into the evening light. The pines at the edge of the property caught the last of the sun and held it a moment longer than the rest of the world, the way pine trees do. The air smelled of wood smoke and sage and the specific good cold of a night coming in clean. This was not the life Wren Maddox had expected to find on the morning she walked out of Redmoor Pack with a tapestry around her shoulders and a scroll with footnotes and nowhere to go but east. It was, in every way that mattered, considerably better. If this story reached you somewhere real, the expulsion scene, Gareth turning away at the market so no one would see his face, that single word through a closed door, drop it in the comments. I read every one. And if you want more stories about Omega heroines who are told they don't belong and spend the rest of the story proving the universe wrong, subscribe and turn on notifications. There are more fires to light.